Welcome to Friday 15 with Master B2B. My name is Brian Beck, here with my partner in crime, Andy? Crime? Andy Hoare.
Did you forget your name, Brian?
No, I didn't forget your name. No, how could I
Your
forget
name. Did you forget your name?
No, I remember my name. Yeah, no, I forgot my name. Yeah. Let me remove you from the stage. Hold on. Let's get rid of Andy Hoare. Oh, where'd he go? There he is. He's back. All right. Anyway, folks, welcome to Friday 15. I'm broadcasting here from Amazon, Washington. That's Seattle to you people. Yeah, exciting up here. Nice and overcast weather as usual, Andy. But overcast in the summer is kind of unusual for Washington because typically in Seattle it's nice and sunny.
That's right.
That lasts about 4 weeks, I think.
That's why people move there, because there's never any rain.
That's right. Never any rain. Well, folks, welcome to Friday 15. We've got some pretty interesting and exciting breaking news today. Well, let's get to that. Andy, did you see this? Last week, Google's search monopoly ruling, they were ruled against by it was the FTC, I believe, right? That said, hey, you're a monopoly. Whoa. What's the deal here, Andy? Talk to us about this and what the implications are.
Yeah, it's just eerie how similar this is to what happened to Microsoft back in the 1990s. And so anybody who's under the age of 30, back in the 1990s, Microsoft was embedding the Internet Explorer search browser, which doesn't even exist anymore, on the desktops of all these PC manufacturers like Compaq Computer, which also doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And they were paying money to do that. So Compaq would get paid billions of dollars to put the IE browser on default on the desktop. Well, fast forward 30 years.
Is it 30? Yeah.
And the same thing is happening all over again, where now it's Google putting its search engine, paying to have its search engine embedded in browsers that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago, like Firefox and Safari. But they're paying Apple, for example, to be embedded in Apple's browser. Okay, so these tie-ins are kind of the centerpiece of this. And the FTC found that paying money to be the default search engine now on these browsers is creating a monopoly. Now, the interesting part about this is it's hard to prove that there's been any harm here, because the court had a finding of fact that Google search engine was the premier search engine in the space.
Right.
On the other hand, they said we don't have the ability to easily click off, even though you can just go to bing.com in the browser. But apparently, even everybody agreed there's something called choice friction and Google's in-house lawyers said this too in emails, which was really stupid. But they said that's asking people too much. That's asking too much for people to just go up to the browser and type in Bing.
That's ridiculous. This is an indictment of the on the laziness of U.S. consumers, I think. Right?
That's exactly what it is. And so the question is, how are they going to relieve this? I think you see on the next slide. The Wall Street Journal had an interesting story about this, saying that Google is kind of a strange monopolist, and they pointed out that the judge found that Google had achieved market dominance because, and I quote, it had the highest quality search engine, which has earned Google the trust of hundreds of millions of daily users. So they got the best mousetrap out there by the finding of fact.
Wow.
But the most interesting part here is that some of the key testimony was given by Microsoft, which owns Bing.
Right.
And Satya Nadella said, this nightmare scenario where, Google could use their search history to train an AI bot. And it's like, oh, really? Like the one Microsoft is an investor in called GPT, which just launched its own search engine called Search GPT.
Right.
So this is $2-3 trillion companies kind of fighting it out over who. But the reality is, and you and I talked about this beforehand, they can complain all they want, but by the time any of this actually comes to pass, this will be in the ash heap of history. I mean, 5 years from now, Google search dominance may be nowhere because we might be using ChatGPT for a lot of this stuff, and Google, for example, may continue to fumble their AI rollouts, and Microsoft may be the dominant search property on the planet.
Could be. I still get back to the harm thing. Like, what is the FTC doing pursuing that? If there's no real consumer harm here, the consumers, I mean, maybe that friction thing is real, Andy. I don't know. But I mean, gosh, I mean, it's sort of like, hey, are we just sort of stupid consumers out here? We don't know how to switch. There's actual choice. And frankly, if someone brought out a better search engine, wouldn't it work to the advantage of the browser companies to build that in? I mean, why?
That's key.
Kind
Yeah,
of
I
let
mean,
them
there's a
do what
reason
they do.
why Apple, which could create a search engine,
Right.
could buy a search engine, uses Google search engine. I'm not an apologist for Google. I've got issues with how they do things too. But the harm here is really a bank shot to say that because Google's search engine's so good and companies are paid to embed it, that people who want to advertise and buy keywords have fewer opportunities because Google's kind of the only game in town. And it's like, that's a little bit of hard. That again, that's a bank shot to
I don't know.
somebody has a better search engine that would eliminate the problem. And that's probably what's going to happen here is these GPTs are going to come along. I don't know about you, but I don't use Google search as much when I use Chat GPT. So maybe we're already along this path.
Maybe. I mean, I do think letting the market, kind of play out here, and someone comes up with a better search engine, people are going to gravitate towards it, including the browsers. Google now has legal mandate or whatever, or a ruling that they're the best search engine. So that's kind of interesting too. That jumped out at me. All right, well, let's get into our topic. This is a fascinating one. We can do a whole Friday 15 just on that. But our topic today is, should the e-commerce function for large global B2B companies with diverse lines of business be centralized or decentralized? And Andy, we're talking here about companies that might have operations in 20 countries and have 30 brands they're operating with, lots of diverse business units. So this is really, we're speaking to large, global manufacturers, distributors, people like that here. And it's a question that you and I hear about sort of all the time. Why don't you take us through kind of what does it mean to kind of what's the issue here?
Yeah, so there really are two schools of thought when it comes to this org design stuff. And this matters, by the way, because the way you design your team will actually produce certain outcomes. It's just a fact. If you have a very centralized team, you're going to get a certain set of outcomes, just that flows from like water does down a river, right?
Yep.
And so it does matter how you design this. And so again, the two schools of thought, centralized versus decentralized. This is a poor graphic to show it, but one is where you put everything in one place and it all gets distributed out inelegantly or elegantly. And then the decentralized is where you forward deploy a lot of these capabilities. Now, we have been talking about this one for a while. You and I have had lots of conversations. And in fact, a year ago at our Mindshare Summit, we asked people to tell us. We handed out paper and we said, design your org chart. And then we hung them on the wall. And I think we had something like 96 different versions of them, excuse me. We put them on the wall and it was fascinating to see people walk around and point at them and say, oh yeah, this is a good idea, or we hadn't considered that, or what have you. So we've been talking about this one for a long time. And so it's not a new concept, but what is interesting is we like to think about this. You and I have talked about this quite a bit. Like, what are the factors that you need to consider when you're making a decision about whether to centralize or decentralize? And this is not an exhaustive list, but we think these are kind of some of the biggies. So one big one is, to what extent is your business really dominated by local customer preferences and behaviors? Currency, language, that kind of thing. If you're operating a multi-brand business and the brands really are unique to a certain country, like I remember when I went to Japan many years ago, it was sort of funny. There was a soft drink there it's spelled CALPIS. And when you say it, it's pronounced Calpis. And you're like,
that's great.
You can't help but say Calpis. That's the name of the drink. But in Japan, that's not, people don't think about it that way. So obviously, if you put that in front of a group of Americans to market that, they'd change the name. And say, what are we doing
it's
here?
like Andy, it's like the Nova in when I guess it was Chevy or whoever released it in South America. Well, Nova is a car, Nova, and Nova means don't go. It doesn't go. So it's the same thing, right? So, but I think this applies not only to geographies at this point, but it also applies to business units, even in the same geography. So if you think about a company that may have different types of products operating in different either brands or different product types, or even serving different customer bases, to me, that's another flavor of decentralized. You need to give, I think, some capabilities to those people to react to their customer, which might be different than the other lines of business the business is in. So I think this cuts across geographic and also business unit lines.
Yeah, and I think, like the second thing is the service component. And what I mean by that is, look, does you have to install the stuff? If you're buying Windows and you have to install the Windows, obviously the installation is a part of the process versus if it's a widget you ship and there's
Right.
no real local dimension on the fact that it's delivered and it shows up, that proportionality matters as
Right.
well. The fulfillment, how difficult is it to fulfill? Can it be shipped in? But
Right.
perhaps the most important factor here is really the location of the talent. If everybody wants to live in a certain country and that's where the talent
Right.
is, then you're going to have to probably forward deploy that particular function and not force them to move to another city where they don't want to live.
Well,
Um,
I think too, yeah, it's location of talent, Andy, and it's also sort of where the talent is available. And then when you think about a centralized function, one of the key arguments is really about developing a center of excellence and expertise concentrated at a corporate level that can then be shared. Think about digital marketing or e-commerce, platform development and experience development elements, things like that. That is really critical, or could be a big advantage to a company. Whereas if it's spread all over the place and you're hiring in markets where there may not be as much sophistication or talent, that becomes more challenging. And that's a big deal. I agree with you. I think that's number one factor in my book.
well, I think you pointed this out too when you were talking about your post on LinkedIn, and you talked about if you centralize, say, and we'll talk about this in a second, the tech infrastructure, then there's some
Yeah,
economies of scale associated with that, some
yeah, for sure.
pricing, and if you've got 25 different versions of platforms all around the world, you can't centralize, and you're not centralizing that, you can't really benefit from a bundled discount
That's
on
right.
on the offering. But I mean, there's some interesting ideas. So why don't we go through each one of these and
Yeah,
give our
for those of you
thoughts on
listening
which
on
of
the
these needs
podcast,
to be, yeah, what should be centralized versus
right?
probably more effectively decentralized for a global B2B manufacturer or distributor.
Right. So this here, for those of you listening on the podcast, is a list of key functions affected. We have 6 of them laid out here. So let's talk through them. So data, consolidation and normalization of data, should that be handled at a corporate level or down, distributed down? And I think I've seen this firsthand with companies I've worked with in the past, Andy. I mean, for example, I remember years ago working with Epson, which is a big printer manufacturer, and they were in 18 countries across the Americas. And this was a big deal for them. They had to allow for the variance of product data at individual country levels because there were different components, features, there were different requirements in that country. Power, for example, is the most common one, right? Powering up a printer, right? The power, configurations are sometimes different in different countries because the electrical grid is different. So I think this can be centralized, for example, but it has to allow for some at the edge. It has to allow for some customization, product data customization. So that's when I think you need some bit of a federated model on.
The counter argument is that, data, if it is in a central location, can be harnessed more effectively. You can
Sure.
have data scientists. You can't
Hmm.
have data scientists in 14 different countries, all,
Right.
you know, leveraging best practices versus a centralized model where you can have 14 data scientists working together in one location. So this one, I think, because we're earlier on, I would tend to lean towards centralizing
Yeah.
the data
Hmm.
until it's more advanced, where perhaps you could decentralize it at some point. But you need
Got
to
it.
centralize the talent, I think, and the
Yeah, I
understanding
would
of
agree
the
with that.
location. Yeah.
I agree with that. Yep. Tech infrastructure, I think, is one that certainly has benefits if it's shared. Again, using these distributed models, where companies may acquire other brands and they have legacy systems or different markets. Some markets might have e-commerce, others don't. You've got individual instances. It's kind of a mess. And if you don't centralize tech, I think, is my opinion, you end up with just a hodgepodge, a lot of technical debt, a lot of difficulty in maintaining systems, and then ultimately, you don't have the same leverage with vendors to negotiate a great contract, right? Because you're negotiating one-offs in all these different markets and countries and business units. So this one, I think, has to be centralized.
Yeah, and a decentralized version of tech infrastructure often becomes a customized version of tech infrastructure, which, is impossible to upgrade at some
Right.
point, becomes costly to maintain. So yeah, this one pretty clearly lies in the other direction in terms of centralization.
I would say marketing, though, Andy, the next one on our list here. This one, I think, has to have some localization, whether that's business unit or geographic. And it's because really, I mean, you're speaking to a customer group here that may have different needs than, they vary by country, even the language, right? Nova, right? Things like, and so marketing, I think, while you can have some centralized expertise around marketing analytics, around SEO, paid search, things like that. When you get down to the language, and the distinctions between the different markets, I think you have to have some distribution here, in my opinion.
Isn't it interesting? You could take the data and the tech infrastructure out of marketing and centralize that, a point of a minute ago, and leave the other part, just like with sales. I think the sales data and the sales tech infrastructure can be centralized, but the actual people have to obviously be on the ground, it seems like. Customer support, boy, that's an age-old question. Do they need to be in market or not? I mean, we've experimented with multiple models here in our lifetimes. I mean, I remember offshore, onshore, nearshore. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I don't have a good answer on this one. I mean, I think that every company is different.
Again, kind of a hybrid here. You need obviously people to speak the language if it's global. But
but people in the Philippines speak English well enough to be able to talk to the United States. Right?
That's right, they do. I think there is some benefit to centralizing at least this to a large degree. And then operations and fulfillment. Look, at the end of the day, you need to, you're going to need localized fulfillment here. There's no question. I mean, you can't. Some things, like I used to work with a company called Teleflora back one of my consumer days, right? And they would have localized fulfillment, but they'd also ship at all these florist entities all over the United States. And but they'd also ship like some of the common goods, meaning the stuff that was shared across all of these florists from a single DC around the United States. So it was, I think, again, we're going to end up here with a hybrid, I think, and our practitioners will reflect that. So let's let's talk through, what some of them said. I mean, here's a quote from Ian Heller. I'll read this one quickly, then Andy will get your comments. Ian's the founder of Distribution Strategy Group. He was formerly at HD Supply. And he said there's a careful balance here, and it's not easy to hit. The optimal solution is the messy one, which is often the case, a hybrid that is unique to the company based on its talent profile, market, and business model. Yeah, amen. I agree with that, Ian. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly what we've been talking about. The decentralized versus decentralized really depends on different functions and overall what the goals of the company are. But you can't just take one model and shove it on top of it and say everybody should do centralized or everybody should do decentralized. It really is based on your business model and basically your go-to-market strategy and what your customers prefer. Because to the point of customer support, it could be that having people in the Philippines speak to people in the United States is just fine. But it could be that having people in the Philippines speak to people in the United States of America doesn't work. So it's specific to the company itself.
Yeah, and we got a lot of comments on LinkedIn when we posted this, Andy. Here's another one from Tim Peterson, President and CEO of Spear Digital. And he said, central at the very top with country, area, brand leaders, whichever is needed, around the organization. That's his recommendation or his thought. Then you get both local expertise, control, and learning with cost savings globally. Again, kind of a hybrid thing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, one area we didn't talk about was finance. And, that's a question that's often asked too, is you centralize the financial component or decentralize it? I think for the most part, companies centralize that because they want to be able to track it. But I've often heard people say, how is money any different from data? Data and money are kind of like the same concept, and they both flow. There's a good reason to centralize both of them. So you wouldn't decentralize the finance of the organization. Why would you decentralize the data component, right? I think there is an analogy between the two. And like you pointed out, cost savings, you can't really do that at the local level if you don't really have a good sense for how to, to normalize it. I think the money should be centralized. And I think when you do tend to save some money, at least in terms of licenses and implementation, et cetera.
Yeah, we just got a comment in on LinkedIn, anonymous user. Thank you for that comment. I believe the key factor here is how customers behave and what they expect from the company's location while centralizing data governance. And FinOps can be great if customers are used to a different workflow. It might lead to more complications than benefits. Interesting. Any reaction to that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if companies have workflow, it's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, in fact, when you think about implementations, how long does it really take to move data around? Not very long. All of the complication with an implementation of a platform, for example, is having it interface with people and their existing processes. And that's what the person just pointed out, is like they have established workflows. This could complicate those workflows. Well, what if the workflows are inefficient to begin with?
Right. That's a good point. And thank you for your comment there from LinkedIn. So, wow. And it's like, I'm getting all kinds of comments here from LinkedIn. I can't share all of them, but Robert, thank you for your comment as well. Well, let's just share it real quick because it's interesting. Robert said, Robert Calvert, thank you. Isn't there a broader centralization topic if the e-business group has a single centralized function versus embedding business functions, with a matrix overhead? So interesting, this whole, I think, Robert's point, I think there's a lot of, back and forth on this. And I think where we're landing and the community said it when we went out to the LinkedIn, we asked this question: should e-commerce functions for large global B2B companies with diverse lines of business be centralized or decentralized? When asked for, sort of absolute, people, 64% of them said centralized, 2/3. So, we've got, clearly there's a lot of benefit to that, building centers of excellence, sharing infrastructure, sharing costs, capital costs, et cetera, operating costs. I tend to lean to that, but there's got to be, in my opinion, some level of, extension out to the business unit, to the local market. So,
well, I also wonder if this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're asked about large multinational global B2B companies, which already have this centralized framework, right? They start with that. When you ask them, well, is this the right version? They're like, well, that's the one we're using, therefore it's probably the right one. So it becomes a confirmation bias. That said, I do think, largely speaking, it's better to centralize versus decentralize, if for no other reason, just for control. I mean, you don't know what's going on. I mean, yes, you can have little experiments taking place, and there's a value in doing that, but you could also have 25 different versions of things, and it becomes a mess.
Well, I think talent's the overriding driver here, in my experience, and working with a lot of different companies that deal with this issue. All right, folks, we're past Friday 20 now, so we got to get to our announcements. Folks, we did recently release our 2024 State of B2B e-commerce report. It is downloadable on our website, and we talk about this stuff. For example, manufacturers need to get over their fears of channel conflict, right? That's one of our topics. And it's available for free on our site. Again, go to masterb2b.com, 2024-state-of-e-commerce-report, and you can download it. There's no cost to do that. Also, we've got some great roundtables coming up this fall. These are filling up quickly. We are running out of space. So if you are interested in joining us in Denver, Chicago, New York, LA, Atlanta, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Minneapolis, whatever one, LA, I didn't miss LA. New York, that's what I missed. Go to our website, masterb2b.com, go to events, and you can sign up at no cost for practitioners. And finally, I want to remind folks that we have our forum online. Go to masterb2b.com. It's an online community, practitioners only. So if you're an executive or a mid-market manager, whatever you are at a manufacturer, distributor, brand, we'd love to have you join us there. Again, masterb2b.com forum. And all of our Friday 15 episodes are available via podcast on your favorite service, Apple, Google, Spotify, here on our website. So folks, again, thank you so much for joining us again for a Friday 15, an action-packed one. We can talk about this for 2 hours. So thanks all for your comments. Any final words before we wrap?
Yeah, you did this one remotely from Seattle, Washington. So the tech infrastructure held up.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'm in the home of Amazon. So AWS better be doing its job. It seems like it is. So yeah, good internet service, thankfully. Well, folks, we'll see you next week on our next Friday 15.